There we go. Okay. I'm gonna sit right here. Lena, you gonna be my cameraman? Yeah? Okay. I do not like plastic blender bottles. I don't know where I even got this from, but I hate them. Not hate them. Hate's a strong word. It's the right word, but still. I don't like them because you can taste the plastic so much. You put whey protein in there one time, and you can still taste microbes of whey powder months after the fact, no matter how well you wash the damn thing. Anyway, welcome back to Optimal Reads. We're reading Fairest. Been a little bit since the last one. But I'm back at it. Hoping that the wind doesn't do too much, but I'm going to hope for the best. She turned 16 2 weeks later. The country celebrated, but on the heels of the week-long party that had come from the coronation, the birthday seemed to dissolve into just one more day of royal shenanigans. An illusionist was hired to perform at the feast, and he awed the court's families with feats of magic and wonderment, and the partygoers were more than willing to be taken with his pretend fancies. Levanna attended her own birthday celebration as the pale, invisible girl. She sat at the head table beside her beautiful sister and pretended not to notice how the illusionist turned a tablecloth into a lion and a lady's handkerchief into a rabbit, and the crowd oohed and awed and placed jovial bets as the lion chased the rabbit under tables and around their ankles. Then pretended the rabbit hopped up into the queen's lap, who giggled and went to stroke the long floppy ears, and the creature vanished. The napkin, still held in the illusionist's hand, was nothing but a napkin. The lion bowed to the queen before he too disappeared, a tablecloth untouched. The crowd was in fits, applauding and laughing. No one seemed to care that every illusion had been centered before the queen and not the birthday girl. Oh, that's fucked up, actually. After a series of flourishing bows, the illusionist took a tapered candle from one of the tables and blew it out. The crowd fell silent. Levanna sensed that she was the only person who didn't lean forward in curiosity. He let the black smoke curl naturally for a moment, before arranging it into a pair of entangled lovers. Two naked bodies writhing against each other. The show of debauchery received boisterous laughter from the families and flirtatious smiles from the queen. It was easy to tell who would be warming her sister's bed that night. For her part, Levanna could feel the heat burning in her cheeks, though she hid her mortification behind the pale-faced glamour. Not that such entertainment was anything shocking, but while the illusion persisted, she could feel Everett's presence in the room like a gravitational pull. The knowledge that he was seeing the same suggestive show, listening to the same bawdy laughter, possibly thinking of his own relations with his wife, made Levanna feel as pathetic and insignificant as a crumb off her own cake. She had not spoken to Everett since he witnessed her impersonating Solstice, which was not altogether unusual. They had shared more words at the funeral than in the entire time she'd known him, but she couldn't shake away the suspicion that he was avoiding her, perhaps as much as she was avoiding him. Levanna assumed he must still be mortified, both at her glamour and at Channary's accusations, but she couldn't avoid a fantasy that maybe he was also flattered. Maybe he had begun to notice how his heart fluttered extra fast when he saw her. Maybe he was regretting marriage, or realizing that marriage was as silly a convention as many of the court families believed it to be, and that he loved her. He had always loved her, but now he didn't know what to do with those emotions. It was a very complex fantasy, which frequently left her even more depressed than she'd been before. The smoke charade faded away to loud cheers, and the illusionist had not finished his bow before every candle flame on the head table exploded. Levanna screamed, tipping backward so fast that her chair crashed to the floor, bringing her with it. Though the flames continued to roar above her, bright and flickering, she realized, after a terrified moment, that there was no heat coming from them. Neither the threatening pulse of fire nor the smell of charred flesh followed. No one else had screamed. Oh, now Levanna's going to feel bad that she embarrassed herself. No one else had tried to get away. Now everyone was laughing. Trembling, Levanna accepted the hand of one of the royal guards. They alone were not showing their amusement. Her chair was righted, and she settled self-consciously back onto it. The flames continued to burn, every one of them now as tall as a person, and with her terror waning, Levanna was able to discern that this was just another illusion. Hovering over the tables of wine goblets and half-finished plates was a line of fiery dancers, twirling and leaping from candlestick to candlestick. Can we have a spin-off book about this guy? This guy sounds freaking cool! Channary was laughing harder than all the others. "What's the matter, baby sister? Come here, baby sister. You can't possibly be afraid of a silly little trick. I want to show you something." Oh, no, the way she said that. "What's the matter, baby sister? Come here, baby sister. You can't possibly be afraid of a silly little trick. I want to show you something." Levanna found that she couldn't respond. Her heart was still thumping wildly, and her distrustful gaze was still fixed on the flame dancers. Their existence, even if only a mental trick created by manipulating her own bioelectricity, made it impossible for her to relax. She could not tear her attention from them, which was fine. She didn't wish to see the mocking expressions around her. Hearing the laughter was bad enough. I just thought of something. Okay, so it mentioned that it's manipulating the bioelectricity. If the guard was a shell, I don't think, well, they would know if the guard was a shell or not, so he probably wasn't. But if there were any shells in the room, they're probably just watching everyone staring at an empty room and laughing their heads off. And the juxtaposition of that is kind of funny, actually. She was only grateful that she'd had enough practice with the glamour of the invisible girl that she hadn't lost her control. Now this is an illusionist. Magic. "Is the princess afraid of fire?" asked the illusionist. Though he didn't stop the illusion, the dancers did stop jumping, instead content to twirl slowly upon each candlewick. "I apologize, Your Highness. I did not know." "Don't worry about her," said Channary, holding a hand toward one of the dancers. "We cannot let her childish fears ruin our fun." "Ah, do be careful, Your Majesty. The fire underneath is still very real." To prove his point, the illusionist sent the nearest dancer stepping down off her candle into Channary's palm, leaving the very real flame still flickering behind. Again, the crowd oohed its pleasure, and again, Levanna was forgotten. Don't worry about her. It was only her birthday, after all. It was only her party. Stop making me feel bad for Levanna. Let's cut it out. The performance ended with all of the dancers turning into old-fashioned rocket ships that blasted upward and exploded into fireworks. Once the delighted crowd had finished applauding, the dessert course was served. Levanna stared down at the chocolate torte with the sugar sculpture that rose up nearly an arm's length above her plate. A delicate series of curls and filigree. It looked as though it would shatter with a single touch. Levanna did not pick up her fork. She wasn't hungry. Her stomach was still in knots over the explosion of fire. She could feel her palms sweating beneath her glamour, and that was the sort of detail that was hard to ignore and could weaken a person's focus. Having already embarrassed herself, she would not let these people see beneath her glamour too. "I'm going to bed," she said, to no one in particular. If anyone had been paying attention to her, if anyone had cared, they would have heard. But no one did. She glanced at Channary, who had called the illusionist over to their table and was feeding him a forkful of chocolate. Levanna wondered what the illusionist looked like beneath his glamour. He was handsome now, but beneath the surface he could be anyone. And they could all be anyone. Why couldn't she be anyone? Why couldn't she be the one person she wanted to be? Perhaps the trouble was that she could never quite figure out who that person was. She pushed her chair out, reveling in the loud screech of legs on the hard floor. No one looked her way. It was not until she had left the dining hall and was alone in the main corridor that someone had stopped her. "Your Highness?" She turned back to see that a guard had followed her into the corridor. Well, 3 guards, but only 2 of them were assigned to follow her at a respectful distance and ensure she wasn't threatened en route to her chambers. This 3rd guard was familiar, but only in the way that she knew that he had served beneath her parents for some years. "What is it?" He bowed. "Forgive my intrusion, Highness. My friend, Sir Everett Hale, asked me to give you this, with joyful birthday wishes." He produced a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. Her heart twisted, and she found that she couldn't approach him to take the gift. There was a bug that jumped up and scared the hell out of me. "Everett Hale?" He nodded. "It's a trick. It's a trick. It's a trick." Her mind repeated the warning over and over. This was something her sister had set up, some cruel diversion, but her heart fluttered anyway. Her pulse boiled and rushed. She dared a glance through the enormous doors back into the dining hall. Everett was stationed at the far end of the hall, but he was smiling kindly at her. As she stared, he placed a fist to his heart, a respectful salute that could have meant nothing. Or could have meant everything. It was all the confirmation she needed. "Thank you," she said, snatching the box away. The guard bowed and returned to his post. That sentence needs to be softer than that. The guard bowed and returned to his post. It took all of Levanna's willpower not to run to her chambers. A maid was there already, waiting to help her undress and wash for bed, but Levanna shooed her out without even bothering to have her dress unpinned. Sitting at her mirrorless vanity, she forced herself to pause and to breathe, so that she could remove the plain paper with utmost delicacy. Her fingers trembled as she undid the fastenings, uncrinkled the corners. Inside the box were shreds of more brown paper and, nestled among them, a small pendant of planet Earth. Silver, perhaps, though it was tarnished and bent. It seemed very old. There was also a card, hand-printed with dreadful penmanship. "Your Royal Highness, I hope that giving you a birthday gift will not be seen as overstepping my station, but I saw this and thought you might like it. May you have only happiness in this, your 17th year. Your friend and most loyal servant, Everett Hale." A note was added at the bottom, almost as an afterthought. "My wife also sends her warmest regards." Oh, see, now that... Oh, so he... Hold up. First off, Everett, you found the princess, sister of the queen, pretending to be your wife, baby and all. And then you give her a birthday present. But you don't want to lead her on, so that's when you mention the wife. But you couldn't just let her have the birthday present? Come on, dog. Before she knew what she was doing, Levanna had torn off the bottom part of the card, ripping away the mention of his wife and shredding it into tiny pieces. Then she lifted the pendant from the box and cradled it against her chest, smiling while she read Everett's words again and again, interpreting, dissecting, again and again and again. Break. "I'm pleased to report that our bioengineering research and development team has been making great progress these past months," said head thaumaturge Joshua Haddon, standing before the Queen's throne and the audience of aristocrats with his hands tucked into his wide sleeves. Dr. Darnell, oh, what's going on, dude? It's Dr. Erland. I was going to say Dr. Elliot for some reason. Believes that the latest advancements in bioelectrical pulse manipulation will result in the successful alteration of natural instincts. With Your Majesty's approval, the team intends to commence testing on lunar subjects within the next 12 months. I don't know why I gave him a bit of a Poindexter voice, but whatever. Channary popped a fried squash blossom into her mouth and waved her hand at the thaumaturge. After swallowing, she licked the butter from her fingertips. "Yes, fine, whatever they think." "Then it shall be done, my queen." Checking his report, Thaumaturge Haddon proceeded to the next matter of business, something to do with a method for increasing productivity in the textile sectors. Levanna wanted to know more about the soldiers. She had heard talk of the ongoing development of bioengineered soldiers for years now. It was a program her father started, perhaps a decade ago? And many of the family snubbed it as a ridiculous concept. Create an army that relied not on their lunar gift but on animal instincts? Ludicrous, they called it. Absurd. Monstrous. Her father had rather liked that description, Levanna recalled. Monstrous was precisely what he meant to achieve, and the research commenced by order of the king. Though he was not alive to see his efforts come to fruition, Levanna was intrigued by his fantasy. An entire army of half-man, half-beast creatures. Soldiers who had the intelligence of humans, but the sensory perception of wild predators. They wouldn't fight by expected and predictable means of warfare, but rather by the basest instinct of hunting and survival to terrorize and pillage and devour their enemies. The thought gave Levanna a chill all along her spine, and not in a bad way. The temptation to control the sort of animalistic strength these soldiers would have made her mouth water. With that sort of power, she could forever quiet the mockery that followed her in the palace corridors, the ongoing rumors about the pathetic, ugly little princess. Fine, said Channary through a yawn, interrupting the thaumaturge mid-sentence. Whatever you think is best. Are we almost finished? Joshua didn't seem at all put off by the Queen's lack of interest in public policy and her country's welfare, though it took all of Levanna's efforts to keep from rolling her eyes. Despite the occasional distracted thoughts, she legitimately wanted to know what was going on in the outer sectors. She wanted to hear the court's ideas for improvement. Perhaps they could simply send Channary off for her afternoon nap and allow Levanna to handle the rest. Excuse me, Channary gets an afternoon nap? I mean, she's the queen, so I guess do whatever the hell you want. I want an afternoon nap. It's not fair. After this video, I'm going to take an afternoon nap. God, I'm such a child. Though everyone would have laughed her head to shreds if she'd suggested such a thing. One more issue to discuss, my queen, before we adjourn. Channary sighed. As I'm sure you're aware, my queen, our previous rulers, may they ever rest in divine luxury, were in the process of developing a biochemical weapon that we have reason to believe could be quite effective in any negotiation efforts with Earth, especially given our ongoing antagonistic relationship and the possibility that it could someday dissolve into violence. Oh, stars above, said Channary, throwing her head back with an overwrought groan. Is all this jargon really necessary? Out with it, Joshua. What is your point? The members of the court sniggered behind their dainty hands. Thaumaturge Haddon stood a little straighter. One of our laboratories has concocted a contagious disease that we believe, though we are yet unable to test, would be fatal to Earthens. As our relationship with Earth has been growing increasingly hostile and may continue to worsen if we're not able to enter into an alliance and reinstate open trade agreements within the next decade, King Merrick thought this disease could be a means of weakening any Earthen opposition both in numbers and resources. And I'm sure my father was entirely correct. You may proceed with your research. Adjourned. I must ask for one more moment of your valuable time, my queen. Huffing, Channary sank back into her seat. What? There's still the issue of an antidote. When he didn't offer any further explanation, Channary shrugged at him. As tempting as it may be to one day release this disease on Earth with no concerns for repercussions, explained Haddon, some strategists, myself included, feel that an even stronger statement would be to let Earth believe the disease is an act of fate, even punishment, and that should we then offer them an antidote as a means to rid themselves of the disease, it could be the factor that ensures any future alliance discussions being swayed in our direction. You want to make them sick, Channary said, slowly and tiredly. And then you want to make them better? That is the stupidest war tactic I've ever heard. No, it isn't, said Levanna. The attention of 100 members of the royal court turned to her, along with the sudden burning gaze of her sister, peering down from her throne. Levanna squared her shoulders and refused to be intimidated. They wouldn't need to know that the disease had come from us. It would be the best type of warfare, the type that no one thinks is warfare at all. We could weaken Earth without risking any retaliation. Tearing her focus from the thaumaturge, she looked up at Channary to find that her sister was spitting venom from her eyes. It didn't bother Levanna, though. She had seen the potential where Channary had not. And then, Once they are so downtrodden as to pose no threat to us in the event of full-on war, we open peaceful negotiations. We make our demands, and we offer the one thing they want more than anything else, an antidote to the disease that has crippled them. It would be seen as an ultimate show of goodwill. Not only that we have been using our own resources to develop an antidote, but that we would offer to manufacture and distribute it to them, our previous enemies. How could they say no to any of our requests? That is precisely the strategy we suggest, said Thaumaturge Haddon. The young princess stated it very clearly. Thank you. Despite the kindness of his words, something in his tone made Levanna feel chastised. Like her presence in these meetings was barely tolerated as it was, and certainly no one had invited her to contribute to them. I suppose I see the potential, said Channary, toying with a lock of hair. You may continue with developing this antidote. That is precisely the conundrum we've crossed, my queen. She raised an eyebrow. Of course there's a conundrum, isn't there? We have already found a means of developing an antidote, and its effectiveness against the infected microbes has been successfully proven through multiple tests. However, that antidote is developed using the blood cells of ungifted lunars. Shells? Yes, my queen. Shells contain the necessary antibodies for the antidote production. Unfortunately, it has proven both timely and costly to obtain blood samples from shells when their population is so widely scattered throughout the outer sectors, and artificial duplication has thus far not been successful. Well then, why don't you cage them up like the animals they are? We'll call it retribution for the assassinations of my parents. A new glint entered Channary's eyes. That's quite brilliant, actually. Let everyone know how dangerous shells are, and the Crown will no longer tolerate the leniency we've given them over the years. We can enact a new law if that will help. Thaumaturge Haddon nodded. I think this is a wise course of action, my queen. To date, Thaumaturge Sybil Mira has been the court's ambassador with the biochemical research team. Perhaps she is a good candidate to begin drawing up a procedure for the best means of obtaining the blood samples. A young woman stepped out of the line of thaumaturges, dressed in a maroon-red coat. She hasn't earned her head thaumaturge rank yet, that's right. With glossy raven's wing hair falling down her back. She was beautiful in the way that all members of the Queen's entourage were beautiful. But there was also something admirable in the way she held herself, a confidence that glimmered. Though her station was beneath the head thaumaturge, her posture and faint smile seemed to indicate that she didn't much believe herself to be beneath anyone at all. Levanna liked her immediately. Agreed. I deem thaumaturge, Sybil Mira, my queen, she said. Mira, as the official royal representative of, ungifted affairs, you have my permission by royal decree to do what has need to be done for the betterment of everyone. Channary's fingers danced whimsically through the air as she strung the words together, more like she was composing a pretty-sounding poem than issuing a decree that could impact the lives of hundreds of citizens, thousands, once their families were taken into account. Still, the thaumaturges bowed respectfully when she finished, and, finally, court was adjourned. The audience stood with the queen, but before leaving, Channary fixed her sweet smile on Levanna. Dear baby sister, she cooed. Come here, baby sister. Levanna flinched before she could brace herself at all, but if Channary noticed, she didn't show it. I have a fitting with my seamstress this afternoon. Why don't you come with me? It would benefit you to have some gowns that aren't quite so sad. Levanna didn't need to look down at her pale yellow dress, or to see how the color faded into her pale glamoured skin, to know what Channary was talking about. She had lost interest in being noticed. Let Channary be known for how fair and mirthful she was. Princess Levanna would earn respect in the court by being intelligent and resourceful, by meeting the needs of her country when the queen was too busy cavorting with her many suitors to care. I am not in need of a new gown. Thank you, my queen. Fine. Don't try anything on, then. You will make an excellent hat stand while I'm being fitted. Come along. She smothered a groan, the thought of denying her sister already exhausting her. Channary swooped ahead, and the thaumaturges and aristocrats all bowed. Walking in her sister's wake, Levanna imagined that she was the one they were really bowing to. As she followed her sister into the palace corridor, she spotted Everett coming toward them. Her heart pattered, but Everett didn't even look at her. He merely stopped and saluted the queen as she passed, one fist clasped over his chest. Levanna tried to catch his eye, but he stared at the wall over her head, expressionless as a statue. Only when she glanced back a few steps later did she realize he had come to change shifts with one of the other guards. The changing of the guard was fast and smooth, like a well-oiled clock. Gulping, Levanna faced forward again, lest she walk into a wall. This could be her chance to thank him for the pendant that was, even then, hanging around her neck, tucked beneath the collar of her dress. She could hear Everett's boots clacking behind her, feel his presence tugging her toward him. The back of her neck tingled, and she imagined him looking at her, admiring the curvature of her neck, his gaze dropping intimately down her back. Her emotions were in tatters by the time they had reached the main corridor of the palace and turned to begin the climb toward Her Majesty's quarters on the top floor. Channary did not like to take the elevators. She had once told Levanna she felt queenly having to lift her skirts as she went up and down the stairs. It had taken all of Levanna's efforts not to ask if that was the same reason she lifted her skirts all those other times, too. Your Majesty. Channary paused, and Levanna came to a stumbling halt behind her. Turning, she saw a girl not much older than she was, dressed in plain utilitarian clothes. She was breathless and flushed, her hair falling out of a loose bun in messy chunks. I do apologize for my forwardness, my queen, she said, the girl panting. She fell to one knee. Channary sneered, disgusted. How dare you approach me in such an informal matter? I will have you flogged for your disrespect. The girl shuddered. I do apologize, she stammered, as if she hadn't been heard the first time. I was sent by Dr. O'Connor from the ARC Med Center with an urgent message for... Did I ask who sent for you? Said Channary. Did I suggest in any way that I cared where you were sent from or whether you had a message for or who that message might be for? No, because I do not have the time to listen to every person who would seek an audience with me. There was a method to having your voice heard. Guards, escort this woman away. The girl's eyes widened. But, oh stars above, I'll handle her request, said Levanna. Go to your fitting, as it is clearly more important than listening to a message from a girl who has run herself ragged trying to get here. Channary snarled. You will not speak disrespectfully to me in front of one of my subjects. Levanna flattened her hands against her skirt to keep them from becoming fists. I meant no disrespect, my queen, only that you seem to have a lot on your schedule today, so please, allow me to assist you with your royal duties. She nodded at the girl who still remained on one knee. What is your message? The girl gulped. It is for a royal guard, your highness. Sir Everett Hale. His wife has gone into labor. They fear... the doctor. They have requested that he come see her right away. Levanna felt a clamp tighten around her ribcage, forcing all the air from her lungs. She glanced back in time to catch the dawning horror on Everett's face. But then Channary started to laugh. What a shame! Sir Hale has only just begun his shift. His wife will have to wait until he is relieved. Come along, Levanna. Gathering her skirt, she began marching up the steps. Everett looked from the girl, a nurse perhaps, or an assistant, to the queen's retreating back. He seemed cemented to the spot in the middle of the corridor. To leave would be to disobey a direct order from his sovereign. Such an act would mark him as a traitor and result in what punishment Levanna could only guess. But his indecision did not wane. How desperate he must be to defy the queen. On top of that, Levanna's own curiosity was piqued. Babies were born all the time, and complications were so rare, and yet Solstice had seemed so weak. Levanna stepped forward. Sister? Channary paused, nearly to the top of the stairs. I am going into town and require an escort. I am taking Sir Hale with me. Her sister's face was murderous when she turned, but Levanna lifted her head and fixed her own glare upon her. She would suffer the consequences later, and she knew very well there would be consequences. But she doubted that Channary would risk being defied in public a second time, and this way she alone would take the blame. Everett would only be following orders. Her orders. The electrified moment stretched on for ages. Levanna waited and imagined she could feel Everett's terrified heartbeat pounding into her, even from 6 paces away. "Fine," Channary finally conceded, her voice nonchalant, and all the tension seemed to melt away from them. It was a false release. Levanna knew. "If you happen to pass down Lake Boulevard, do bring me some sour apple petites, won't you?" With a flip of her hair, the queen turned away and continued up the stairs. Peculiarly dizzy, Levanna realized she'd been holding her breath. Only when Channary was no longer visible did Everett break from his watchful position. "My wife?" he said, emotion filling up his voice, his shoulders, his eyes. He walked right past Levanna and grasped the nurse's elbows, lifting her to her feet. He seemed wary and anxious, almost as if he'd been expecting this. "Is she—" Still pale from her encounter with the queen, the nurse took a moment to comprehend his question, before sympathy creased her brows. "We should hurry." And then there's a break.